A very good afternoon to you all. This is the second for the history series, is the second Golden Jubilee Distinguished Lecture. And we are very honored to have with us Professor Neeladri Bhattacharya today. So Professor Bhattacharya, my senior colleagues from my department and other departments of the university, and also colleagues from other institutions, the students, without whom this lecture has no meaning. And so welcome to everyone to this lecture. And on behalf of the Dean, Professor Jyotirmay Sharma, I offer his sincere apology for not being able to be here today. He'll come later because of his academic and administrative responsibilities. Though Neeladri Bhattacharya doesn't need any introduction, but still I think a formal introduction would not be too bad. It's really a pleasure and honor for me to introduce Professor Neeladri Bhattacharya. All of you know that he's the iconic teacher. There are many JUNites here sitting. Iconic teacher of the Center for Historical Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, where he served for many decades, actually 1976 to 2017. And all the more, this day is very important because we are very close to the Teachers' Day. So just one day. So that's why it's always great to have a clap for him, the iconic teacher of JNU. I did not have the good fortune to sit in his class, but I have my peer groups, and they have always raved about his teaching. He's a powerful influence on all his students, and I've heard that his course on historical method was so popular that it was attended by students from other institutions as well. He's at present a visiting professor at Ashoka University, Sonipat. He has been an Agatha Harrison Fellow of St. Anthony's College, Oxford, and has held visiting appointments in Europe, South Africa, United States, to name Paris, Chicago, Johannesburg. Professor Bhattacharya's research and publications have been on the making of the colonial rural order, on custom, law, and colonialism, on colonial power and discourse, and on history and theory. His publications include Laboring Histories, Agrarian Labor and Colonialism. Then this is one of his landmarks, The Great Agrarian Conquest, the colonial reshaping of a rural world. In fact, many of the students were awaiting the publication of this book in 2018. Then Talking History, Conversations with Ramila Thapar, which was done jointly with Ramin Jahan Beglu. He's from the OP Jindal Institute. Then Landscape, Culture and Belonging, Writing the History of Northeast India. This was co-edited with Joy Pachau from the Center for Historical Studies. And of course, the famous JNU Stories, co-edited with Janki Nair. Bhattacharya has been co-editor of the book series Themes in Indian History, which was from, of course, we all know, Oxford University Press, and the journal Studies in History, and editor of Tracts for the Times from Orient Logman and now Orient Black Swan, a series on issues of contemporary concern. He also edited special issues of Forests, Fields and Pastures for Studies in History, and Rewriting History for Seminar, February 2003. Neeladri Bhattacharya was the chief advisor of the NCERT history textbooks for schools, and we know how important those textbooks were, all the more in the present scenario. So those were from classes 6 to 12, with a very good, there were many important historians in his team, and they did a wonderful job. It was produced between 2005 and 2008 and edited all the modern history textbooks. Among his recent essays, mention may be made of Framing a Question, Questioning a Frame, in Ramila Thapar edited, To Question or Not to Question, That is the Question, from Aleph 2015. Violence and the Languages of Law, which was edited by Aparna Balachandran, Bhavani Raman. So there also he had this chapter. Then the other very important chapter is Memory, History and Politics of the Hindu Right in Niels F. May and Thomas Mason Ed's National History and New Nationalisms in the 20th Century, a global comparison. And a revised version is published in Beveridge et al., Claiming the People's Past. Currently, Neeladri Bhattacharya is working on a book on law, violence, and the cultural politics of colonial governance, and another one on the embedded histories of cultural objects, focusing on the Kohinoor, and we are going to hear this today. So he's also, there are many other things, but to cut a long story short, he's also engaged in 2 long-term book projects, one on rural markets and another on agrarian production. So we all look forward to a vibrant lecture from you, and the floor is yours.
I would like to thank the Dean, Jyotirmay Sharma, and Professors Suchandra, Ghosh, and Anandita, Mukhopadhyay, who invited me for this talk here. And I'm really glad and happy to be here with all of you today. I'll be talking about, as was announced, I'll be talking about the curse of Kohinoor, the making of a myth. All of you have heard about the curse of Kohinoor. My effort would be to say that the curse always has a history. If a curse becomes a social force, if it matters to people, if it captures the imagination of people, it cannot capture that imagination unless there is a history to that constitution of that imagination. And it is that history that I would like to talk about today. Punjab, as you know, was annexed by the British on 29 March 1849. At the end of the Second Anglo-Sikh War. The Kohinoor diamond was taken over by Dalhousie after the Treaty of Lahore in 49. Slightly later in 1949. And the Lahore Treaty was imposed on 11-year-old Dilip Singh, who was the monarch at the time, and the British were the guardians of the minor, and they displaced the minor and took over Punjab. A ship of the Royal Marine, HMS Media, was requisitioned to get the Kohinoor from India, transport it back to England. And after many adventures and anxious wait, this Kohinoor, the ship, Media ship with the Kohinoor, reaches England, Plymouth, in June 1950. On July 3rd, 1950, this diamond, which was claimed as the biggest diamond, whether it was the biggest diamond is a matter of slight debate. On July 3, it was given over to Queen Victoria. In 1951, this diamond was exhibited on the great exhibition which was held at Hyde Park in the Crystal Palace. That's some of the images of the Hyde Park. This Crystal Palace was built primarily to house the exhibition in 1951. And it was designed by Joseph Paxton, and the entire thing was of steel and glass. It was one of the biggest constructions in steel and glass at that time. So Kohinoor was part of the exhibition here, the India section, and thousands and thousands of people queued up to go and see that Kohinoor. Even before the Treaty of Lahore was signed and the Kohinoor was given over, there was a lot of anticipation in England, in the newspapers all over England, about the possibility that the Kohinoor would come to Britain, about the desire to possess that Kohinoor in Britain. From the many, so this is the Kohinoor on Queen Victoria after it's put on her brooch there, and that's the Kohinoor as mounted on the crown, which was not always worn by the queen because of that fear of the curse. It was usually just displayed, and even now it is displayed at the Tower of London there. I was talking about this desire which you see in England to possess the Kohinoor, and this is before the Kohinoor actually is taken over, and it's in one of the newspapers, but similar reports appear in other newspapers too. The Kohinoor, the famous diamond, the largest and the most precious in the world, forfeited by the treachery of the sovereign at Lahore and now under the security of British bayonets at the fortress at Govindgarh, is hoped ere long as one of the splendid trophies of our military valor will be brought to England in attestation of the glory of our arms in India. So Kohinoor was this trophy which would be brought from India. That's the desire, and that's the thing which is played up all the time in the process of that transfer from India to England, in the discourse of that time, that this is this desire, this desire to possess and make it part of the royal jewels in England was a desire which animated public discourse of the time. But 5 years after the Kohinoor was taken away from the 11-year-old monarch, Dilip Singh, and handed over to Queen Victoria, and 3 years after the famed diamond was displayed at the Great Exhibition in 1851, there was a curious story which began circulating in Britain. It appeared first in a newspaper called Pen and Pencil, and then it suddenly spread. It spread all over England. All the county papers began writing about it. This appears on 10th March 1855. It said that there is a strange and gloomy superstition in India respecting the possession of the Kohinoor. The famous diamond, which all England went mad to see at the Crystal Palace in Hyde Park, and which the Hindus say entails ruin and destruction on every dynasty that possesses it. Then it goes on, this note goes on to describe how the historical past of the Kohinoor. It went on to narrate this long history of how the diamond moved from one hand of one despot to another, from Mir Jumla, the original possessor, to Emperor Aurangzeb, to Muhammad Shah, to Nadir Shah, the tyrant robber of Persia, who desolated the plains of Hindustan and returned to Persia with the Kohinoor as part of his plunder, only to lose the precious gem to Ahmed Shah Durrani, who was established as the king of Kabul after the assassination of Nadir Shah. The Durrani clan could not retain the treasure for long. When the last ruler of the dynasty, Shah Shuja, was forced into exile, he took refuge in Ranjit Singh's court with the great diamond in his possession. Ranjit Singh compelled him to part with it, but the Sikhs too lost their empire and the demand. The British destroyed the Sikh nation, transferring the Kohinoor to the Queen, that is Queen Victoria. So it is constantly moving from one ruler to another, and whoever possesses it loses it. And in some way, that dynasty, what is suggested in it, that dynasty is ruined, because that ruin was part of the history of Kohinoor. Kohinoor cannot be dissociated from the history of this loss constantly. It says then, and this is very important, I'll keep coming back to this, it says then, this then is the history of the famous diamond, and these are the facts on which is founded the superstition that no dynasty possessing the fatal gem can prosper or continue. This superstition has a material truth, and I would like you to note the words very carefully because I would like to unpack it later on. This superstition has a material truth. So many foregone coincidences could not fail of leading to a like conclusion for that which is to come after. The dark shadows of such a past must inevitably fall on the pathways of the future. But it also has a spiritual truth, which is that ill-gotten wealth seldom prospers with those who have gotten it. and that if justice sleeps for one generation, she wakens up with her naked sword brandishing before the eyes of another. It goes on to say, the Kohinoor has been fatal to all its possessors because they were all men of violence and crime. They ruled lawlessly and they plundered ruthlessly. And that plundered wealth turned into curses, not to blessings in their hands. With us, that is Britain, with us, when the people of India shall be ruled in justice and mercy, the chief ruler of England may wear the Kohinoor on a brow uninjured by its mystical blaze. But until then, until just not lawlessness, right not violence, stand by the Indian throne in our British halls of government, we may fear that the fate of the Kohinoor may be fulfilled here as in Hindustan, and that ruin may follow robbery and judgment come after crime. Now, these obviously are loaded words, loaded statements. A lot is being said here. And what is being said we need to unpack, because we see this unfold in many different ways subsequently. And when this paper, pen and pencil, the statement of this paper is then reproduced, it is edited out. Last part of it is edited out, and it is the earlier part which talks of the despot strutting the stage of history, and one despot kills another, or displaces another, or dominates another, conquers their territory, and that story of the despots, the loss of the diamond, that's repeated in all the papers. Pen and pencil itself did not survive long. It was a profusely illustrated paper, a part, run by someone who was linked to the family which ran the Illustrated London News, and it's died soon. But this news kept circulating after that. On 10th of March, 2 London newspapers, Daily News and Express, printed the full text that was there in pen and pencil. Within 3 days, the story had spread to Ireland and was published in the Dublin Evening Post and then in the Belfast Mercury, both carrying the 712-word version, and then Limerick and Clare Examiner printing the shorter 47-word one. In the weeks that followed, we see the story appear in Wales, spread back to London and to Ireland, and then after 2-3 months it fades out, or at least it seemed so. 100 years later, we know it didn't fade out. It is still has a social force and a political force, and it still matters to people. It has the power to excite public imagination and worry the royalty. When during the recent coronation, there was talk of Queen Camelia wearing the crown studded with the Kohinoor. The story of the curse was retold in Indian media. You can see it in Google hundreds of times. Everyone was talking of the curse, the curse, the curse. And the royalty in its wisdom refrained from allowing Camelia to wear a crown with the Kohinoor. I intend to explore this legend of the Kohinoor as it developed. I want to understand why the story was so eagerly reproduced in print, read, talked about, and believed in. How did it become part of the folklore of public memory? Why did it exercise power over popular imagination? If a strange and gloomy superstition from the East troubles a seemingly modernist West, enlightened West, and scares the royalty, then we must also ask, what is it that disturbs? What is it that troubles? And why does it do so? This is a country which claims to be enlightened, rationalist, reasoned, and suddenly this superstition from the East is disturbing them so much that the queens of England cannot wear the crown. It was rarely worn by the queen. It is occasionally, very, very seldom, in some occasions it was worn. As I showed, Queen Victoria initially had it in a brooch, but she also stopped having it. It is better to exhibit rather than wear it, because there is this fear of that, and there is a lot of discussion of that fear. But there is perhaps an even more elementary question to ask. Was this superstition from the East? Or Where did it come from? How did it develop? How did it circulate? Where did it originate? How did it spread all over? What does the history of the origin tell us about the story of the curse? And I would like to argue that it did not originate in the East. It did not originate in India. When the Kohinoor was acquired, and Lord Dalhousie was sending it back to Britain. And that's the second section of my paper on collating the past. And I argue, and I suggest, and I show in the paper, that when the initial history of the Kohinoor was collected, there was no mention of this curse. When the Kohinoor was collected, Dalhousie asked his juniors, Login, who was in charge of the Tosha Khana, the treasury, to write to all the lower officials to collect traditional stories, historical evidence, reports, which tell us about the history of the Kohinoor. And this was done over the next 2-3 months. And this was important to the British. The British, by the mid-19th century, had a sense of history, an argument about history. To write the history of a thing was to know it. Within that discourse of history that developed at that time, to write the history of an object was to know the object. It was to locate the object in time and space. It was a process of familiarizing, that is, familiarizing something you do not know, familiarizing the other, familiarizing the unfamiliar, something which will overcome the alienness of the object that you are going to have, the strangeness of that object. It was an act through which an object was attributed value, imbuing it with meaning. And through such an act of writing, of collation of evidence and writing of history, the seemingly natural object, natural thing, here in this case a diamond, was given a temporal, spatial, historical existence. So collection of the material was very important, and this knowing the object, knowing its history, was to grasp it. It was an act of possession. And you cannot possess and grasp and make your own if you do not know the history of that object or the history of that thing. So writing that history is important, and we see that in all the archiving projects of the British Dominion. They set up the archives, again, to memorialize the nation, to know the past of the nation. Doing research on the history of India became important for holding India, knowing India, grasping India. So this knowledge was to be collected, but it was not only for the official purpose. It was then to be circulated, made public, made available to people to historicize their notion of what the object was. So the probe began, and the officials went about collecting traditional stories and all the evidence that was available. And reports came back, and 2 or 3 of these reports I want to mention, because none of them talk about the curse, but they are very often traditional reports of traditional lore about the diamond. The first tradition was collected from the oldest jeweler in Delhi, who said that the diamond was extracted from the mines on the bank of river Godavari during the lifetime of Krishna, who was supposed to have lived 5,000 years before. It was found by a zamindar and became a property of Raja Kangsha. It was subsequently acquired by Bikramajit of Pawar dynasty, Pawar tribe, the Raja of Ujjain, who became the master of the whole of Hindustan. When the Mohammedans invaded India, the jewel fell into the hands of the Ghori dynasty, and from then on, successively, it went to the Tughlaqs, the Sayyids, the Lodhis, and the Mughals, and finally to Ranjit Singh. So there is a lineage here being traced, and this is a sacred lineage. It traces it back, the origin, to Krishna. And then there is a play between the good and the evil. It also is taken over by Mohammedans, who are represented as the evil people, the despots who come from outside kind of story. So that's the story of the jeweler. That's one of the histories which is sent back. Now, the second report is collected by Metcalfe and from Akbarnama, and then a third report from elsewhere. And the Akbarnama story, as reported here, says that it talks of the time when Prince Humayun, after acquiring the Kohinoor from Raja Vikramaditya of Gwalior, went to Agra and he gave the Kohinoor to Babur. Babur did not want to have it. He gave it back to Humayun. Then Humayun fell ill. And Babur was told by advisors that you must sacrifice the most precious things that you have in order to recover, in order for Humayun to recover. So they all said that give up the Kohinoor. He said the Kohinoor doesn't belong to me, it belongs to my son. So he promised to give up his life. And the story goes that, which you must have heard earlier, that Babur gradually becomes ill and he dies and Humayun recovers, but in the process, the Kohinoor remains with the Mughals at that time. So the Kohinoor, the Mughals continue to possess the Kohinoor. And the third set of stories, which McGregor said, is a story where the jewelers, he says that when he asked the jewelers to, again, some of the other jewelers to give talk about the history of Kohinoor, they said the value of the Kohinoor, they said, look, it's so valuable we can't actually talk about that value. Then they went to Fakir Nuruddin to go to Shah Shuja's favorite wife, Ufa Begum, to ask her the question. And Ufa Begum was asked the question, and she said that its value again is so difficult to estimate, actually. So he says, if a man throws one stone on the east, another on the west, one in the north and one other in the south, the value of the Kohinoor is as much as that, which is essentially a metaphorical way of saying we cannot estimate the value. Now, this is one of the stories McGregor says, but the final story, which again is repeated by Dalhousie all the time, is when Shah Shuja was asked, he said, what is the value of Kohinoor? And he says, and I quote, good luck, for he who has possessed it has obtained it by overpowering his enemy. Therefore, it is good luck that if you have it, you have the power to dominate the world. You have the power to be sovereign. So it is the power of the sovereign to possess the Kohinoor. So this is not a story of bad luck. And these are the stories which were sent back. So the point I'm making, when the history goes from here back to Britain, these stories of the curse is not really codified in any particular form. And Dalhousie, when he writes the report to send back, based on these all the other evidence that he collects, he again talks of the Kohinoor as being the trophy of the victors. In fact, the curse narrative that spreads inverts the story that Dalhousie writes. Dalhousie's story, in Dalhousie's story, which he writes to the Queen, a long letter describing what the Kohinoor, the past of the Kohinoor, he again describes how this moved from one despot to another. So he says, from the Mughals to the nomadic warrior Nadir Shah, to Ahmed Shah, Abdali, to Shah Shuja, to Ranjit Singh, it moved from one despot to another until it has now found, and again I quote, the final resting place on the crown of the Queen of England, the monarch who ruled the world with justice and ensured law and order. So in this narrative of Dalhousie, we see the standard stockpile of Orientalist imageries. There is the description of the despot strutting on the stage of history. On the history of Orient is always a history of Oriental despotism. Everyone is a despot. And there are intrigues, machinations, deceptions, murders, blood, and gore. But in Dalhousie's narrative, unlike in the curse narrative, Kohinoor is a trophy of the victor. Those who win the battle, those who can conquer the others, possess the Kohinoor. Those who lose it cannot have the Kohinoor. So it is the symbol of sovereignty. It is the symbol of power. it is the victor who owns it. Now, the curse narrative inverts the whole thing. In the curse narrative, the structure of movement and mobility is the same, but instead of focusing on the victor, it focuses on those who lost out. It's a story and a narrative of loss, and it is the story of those who lost, not those who won. So Dalhousie's narrative, I would argue, is focused on the victor. It is a celebratory history. Even though it is past of despots, it is a celebratory history of the history in which the diamond, great diamond, moves from one sovereign to another sovereign to a third sovereign until it has reached the British. And now it is as if that history of mobility will be replaced by a history of stability. That history of despotism will be replaced by the history of a sovereign who rules over the empire with, as an upholder of justice, law, and order. So despotism will give way to this civilized rule of the British Empire. So the play between tyranny and justice is very, very interesting in this argument. But when the curse narrative that I quoted talked of the curse, there is something else which was there, which is in this last para. The Kohinoor has been fatal to all its possessors because they were all men of violence and crime. They ruled lawlessly and they plundered ruthlessly, and that plundered wealth turned to curses, not to blessings, in their hands. This part is is similar to what is being said in the earlier paragraph. But then with us, and this is the important thing, with us, when people of India shall be ruled in justice and mercy, the chief ruler of England may wear the Kohinoor on a brow uninjured by its mystical glaze. But until then, until justice, not lawlessness, right, not violence, stand by the Indian throne in our British halls of government, we may fear that the fate of Kohinoor may be fulfilled as in Hindustan, and that ruin may follow robbery. There is here a very clearly a qualification, a warning, a narrative of the curse, which ends by saying that that we cannot take for granted that the British ruler is actually ruling with, is the upholder of justice. You have to be a just ruler in order to possess the Kohinoor. So there is almost a demand that please actually let the British rule be a rule of justice, uphold law and order, rather than violence, tyranny, and domination. Therefore, this is something which I find extremely important. It is important to understand why in 1856, suddenly there is this kind of a warning being given. And then this warning becomes part of the public imagination as it is spreading. And this I'll try to link up with the other stories that I'm going to tell. So embedded in this story is an argument I would like to suggest, that there is an argument of morality and justice. A morality of colonial government, not an unhistoricized morality. They are talking about a morality of colonial governance. Colonial governance is not being questioned, but even colonial governments should have an internal morality of its own. And so there is a demand for an argument here of morality and justice, a demand for good governance, and an argument that ill-gotten wealth seldom prospers, and those who have plundered and looted will suffer. There is almost an quiet suggestion that British are also plundering and looting. And if you plunder and loot, you will suffer. That's the kind of thing which is being stated through this. And there is a radical demand for a different kind of colonial governance. It is not an anti-colonial statement. It is a statement which affirms power, colonial power and empire, but talks of a new form, a more civil form, a form where there is some form of law and justice. This is an acknowledgement, I would argue, that the diamond was unjustly acquired. And unless the taint of that unjust acquisition is cleansed from the diamond, actually the British rule can face disaster. This is a statement which I would suggest is suffused with apprehension, torn by internal conflict. It hoped the Kohinoor would be worn by the sovereign in England, but feared that the curse may continue to haunt the royalty. It hoped that the story of the diamond would be dissociated from the history of despotism, but it was uncertain of this rupture with despotism. Only when India was ruled by justice and mercy could the Queen wear the Kohinoor uninjured by its mystical glaze. But when was that time? Not now. It was being projected to a future. Till then, it is saying that till then, actually, there is a problem. The rule of justice in India was a demand, a hope, an obligation, not a description of the real now. This is not what is there. We may fear, as it says, we may fear that the fate of Kohinoor may be fulfilled here as in Hindustan, and that ruin might follow robbery and judgment come after crime. Now, there is this clear statement about crime here. So there is a lot being said which needs to be unpacked in the discourse of the time about the curse that is. Over time, this curse was refigured, and its retributive power was gradually modified. It was said first that this curse is only a curse which affects the men. If the woman wears it, if the queen wears it, there will be no curse. Then it was gradually suggested, no, even the queen could not wear that Kohinoor. I'm not suggesting that 56 is when, in pen and pencil, is when it is first suggested. The Kohinoor curse is first suggested. It came out even earlier. There is a statement in Illustrated London News much earlier on, even before the Kohinoor is acquired, which I'll come to later on, maybe. This is one of the earliest mention here of the curse story. But this mention, the language of this is very different from the language in 56. Here it says, this famous diamond, the largest and the most precious in the world, forfeited by treachery of the sovereign at Lahore, and now under the security of the British bayonets at the fortress of Govinda, is hoped along as one of the splendid trophies of our military valor will be brought to England. The mischievous superstition attaching to the possession of this unique and invaluable diamond may be utterly crushed by the retributive consignment. That is, because it will be given to the Queen, everything will be cleansed. And our august Queen, herself the brightest example of female sovereignty in the annals of history, in the annals of England, would be appropriately adorned with a jewel of analogous value to that of the loyal estimation so universally assigned to her in the hearts of her subject. It appeared in the Delhi Gazette and appeared in one or two newspapers, Illustrated London News and one or two, but it faded out. So my point is that it is not the first utterance of something, a story, first utterance of a story or a curse which matters. We have to see when the curse actually captures public imagination. Here it is mentioned, the mischievous superstition attaching to the possession of this unique and invaluable diamond may be utterly crushed by the retributive. It mentions and represses the story. It says that the curse will have no effect. Whereas in 56, there is a different thing, where the curse is being used to make demands on the state and the government that please reform your ways of being. So we need to see how this curse acquires life and what exactly is happening. My own hunch is by 56, Dalhousie is coming under massive attack. Dalhousie's aggressive policy of takeover of princely states, of all the states in India. Satar is taken over in 1848. Then Jhansi is taken over in 54, Nagpur is taken over in 54, Tanjore and Arcot is taken over in 55, Awadh is taken over in 56. There's a lot of apprehension about this aggressive policy. There's a lot of criticism which is played out in the parliament. If you see the parliament debate, you'll see on the one hand there is the critique coming from the Tories, which is Ellen Barrow and others, who are very upset with the arrogance of Dalhousie and the way he goes around. He's not critical of the aggressive policy of conquest, but critical of the ways of Dalhousie. And there's a long debate which is going on. But there's also critique of the paternalist colonial officials who do not want the aristocracy and the princes to be treated badly, who would like a softer policy, who would like a certain paternal concern for for those sections of the elites, the aristocracy and the upper classes, who they thought would be the base of British power. And aggressive policy against them was alienating them. And they said, when the 1857 happened, they all said that this is the result of Dalhousie's policy. And Dalhousie's governor generalship ends in 56. So my hunch is that this anger against Dalhousie links up the curse story and spreads the curse story, because Dalhousie brought the diamond to England. And in 50, itself, in one of the letters that Dalhousie writes, which is there in Dalhousie Correspondence, is reproduced also in Baird's volume on private letters of Dalhousie. And Cooper writes to him in 50 saying that people are saying here, that's officials and others, that you are responsible for getting this cursed diamond to Britain. And Dalhousie says, this is not a diamond which is cursed. Who the hell has said this? Who is the wicked mind which has produced this? And he thinks that Hume in the Parliament has raised this question. His anger against Hume is that Hume was critical of his policy about takeover of this, and he campaigned for the Raja of Satara at that time. And his anger, Dalhousie's anger against Hume leads to his suspicion that Hume and many others like him are spreading this mischievous story. And for him, the Kohinoor was a trophy of the victors. So we need to see, therefore, how is it that this story spreads, and how is it captures the mind of the people. And I would argue there's a lot to be said, and I have written extensively on it. I am isolating three kinds of issues that I will like to speak on. One is that there was, at this time, in 19th century, a widespread, and that's the important thing to remember, that in the 19th century, it is not as if England, everyone believes in the enlightened ideas, the rationalist, scientific ideas of the West. It is not a place where belief in popular religion, magic, the occult has disappeared. All recent books, wonderful books being written on the popular culture and religion, shows how pervasive was the belief in the occult. And Queen Victoria herself, there is a lot of writing on how Queen Victoria was persuaded by by ideas of the occultist ideas and all. Therefore, belief in these kind of ideas about the power of the curse, power of magic, power of witchcraft, power of sorcery still was pervasive. So it is the earlier teleology of science, scientific, teleology which said science and enlightenment and reason and rationality developed in the West through the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. That's the narrative of the West, the rationalist narrative of the West. That is the history that we have been told. That is not how the progress happened. It was all muddy. It was all interlaced. The past and the ancient and the traditional, the power of tradition was not all displaced. All these things survived within society, and modernity integrated them. It is the modern integrates that as part of itself. It is not unsanitized modern. So within this, there is, my argument would be, there was a space within the imagination of people where belief in magic and belief in witchcraft or belief in the power of the occult could be there. And then we have to see how people at this time believed in the power of stones. The fact that stones have power is something a lot of you also may be believing in, that people wear different stones because they feel that each stone has a different power to it. Now, this was something, the power of stone was believed in Europe we have evidence from the first millennia to the 20th century that books after books are being written on stones. Some stones were seen as beneficent, others were seen as malevolent, some had therapeutic qualities, others were poisonous, some could cure the ill, others could cause illness and death, some enhanced your potential qualities, others depleted them, some brought good fortune, others were cursed. So the idea that each stone had specific qualities and this contrast between the good stone and the bad stone is something which was not just simply part of the folklore. It was written about. It entered the written text. It was written by people who claimed to be rational, reasonable, and scientific. One could argue that there are three types of text. One type was those texts which simply reported what was said by the people and believed in everyday life, circulating folklore without questioning them. Others sought to dismiss the folklore as irrational, unreasonable. And a third who sought to evaluate, assess, differentiate what was believable and purge what was not believable. One of the earliest available Western text on the stone was the one written by Pliny in the 1st century CE. His book on natural history, which is the last part, is on stones. And he talks a lot about the different qualities of stones, but he is also, I would argue, that he's also differentiating what is acceptable and what is not. He says, sorry. Oh no, I haven't got the quote here. I'll read out. He says, now, this is Pliny's statement, we'll now proceed to speak of the various kinds of precious stones, the existence of which is generally admitted, beginning with those which are the most highly esteemed. Nor shall we be content ourselves with doing only this, but with a view to consulting the general welfare of mankind, we shall also refute the infamous lies that have been promulgated by the magicians, for it is with reference to precious stones, more particularly, that they have circulated most of their fabulous stories, stepping under that most alluring guise of ascertaining remedial virtues beyond all bounds and entering the region of the marvelous, the incredulous. So he separates the believable and unbelievable and what should be purged out of folklore and what can be accepted. Now this attempt to separate the two increases in the 17th and 18th century, where scientific revolution is taking place and enlightened ideas are being talked of. There a lot of books are being published. One of the earliest which comes out is this is the Pliny's history, natural history, the first page of that, and which contains the last section is on the stones. Now, one of them, Robert Boyle, who writes one of the earliest book, an essay about the gems, tries to again differentiate the magic, within the folklore, what is magic and what is not, what is believable and what is not. Now, my argument is by actually separating what is believable and what is not, they were all reaffirming the power of stone, the idea that stones have power. Some things cannot be accepted, but other things can be. And he looks particularly at the therapeutic power of gemstones and says that they are so hard that most of it, if you consume, you will be generally harmed. But there are dissoluble stones which can be consumed, which are good for therapeutic purpose. But this debate goes on, and in the 19th century, there are hundreds of books being produced. And this is the time I'm talking about the curse of the stones. All the books talk about the folklore, about the power of stones, and they all talk of the magical power of stones. And the most famous is this book, The Curious Lore of Precious Stone, written by Kunz, who actually was an extremely important figure in the world of jewelry at that time, where he was a member of a lot of these scientific societies, and he was consulted by the government and by the museums to come and give suggestions on it, oversaw the things, was given a lot of honorary degrees because of his knowledge about. He writes this book, and if you see this book, it's an extremely interesting book. It is full of folklore. There are some folklore about gems and their power of mirror. Some, he says, is not believable, but a lot of them are believable in his own argument. He was the trustee of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, honorary curator of precious stones at the American Museum of Natural History. He headed the U.S. mining exhibitions in the Paris Exposition, Chicago in 93, Paris Exhibition in 98, Chicago in 93, Atlanta in 95, Paris again in 90. And he's written more than 200 articles and many, many books. So the power of a scientific voice, the power of a scientific voice was to constitute the imaginary of a people who would believe that this person, what he's saying, is true. Now that's what leads to the constitution, I'm saying, of an imaginary, a public imaginary, which is willing to believe. Which is willing to believe in the power of a curse because you are writing about it. It's not out of a place. There are discussions and chats about it all the time. And he still is talking about a contradiction between what can be believed and what is not, what is scientific and what is not. But there are many other books, and I give one example of it. Oh no, I haven't got it here. Of books which say that modern science has ratified most of the folklore. And therefore, we can believe in the folklore because it's not in conflict with what we believe as rational. And these kind of texts, which are part of the circulating, I'm here referring to this particular book by Bratley, but there are by Fernie, there is another book by Fernie, which all say that students of what Bratley is, for instance, saying, the students of the occult recognize that spirit does not work directly on matter. It needs a medium. An intermediate middle, a point of conjunction and exchange of energy. The medium is that invisible, mysterious something in which the matter atom floats. This is called astral light by the occultists and magicians, and luminiferous ether by the modern scientists. And this luminiferous ether is what you have in gemstones and others, and particularly in diamond, which has almost a fluorescence light emitting from it. So this is what they are all ratifying. So written about, circulated, not in the context of curse, it's creating a public imaginary where belief in the occult, magic, sorcery is circulating at one level. At another level, the power of stones. So it is in this context that the curse acquires its life. And this is the life that we should be thinking about. Every superstition doesn't become a social force, capturing imagination. When it becomes a social force, we must ask, why did it become? What is the basis of its popularity? Why is it capturing the mind of the people? I'll make two other points now. What time did I start? 3 o'clock. 3? Oh, 3:50. I'll take another 15, 20. It's a section which I called Of Repentance and Atonement. It's on Wilkie Collins's book, The Moonstone. And my argument would be, Wilkie Collins's book embeds this belief on the curse in popular mind in a way they cannot actually purge it out of that mind. Wilkie Collins was an extremely popular novelist. He was a friend of Dickens, and he wrote some of the books with Dickens itself. But Dickens was someone who was pathologically hostile to the natives of the colonies. He announced that I don't believe in the notion of the noble savage. I see them as all as violent. This, a whole series of standard stereotypical Orientalist imageries about the natives he repeats, and particularly after 1857 and the Kanpur massacre, and horrific descriptions. And he writes, Wilkie Collins writes a book, The Perils, along with him. The first chapter is Dickens, then the subsequent chapters are Wilkie Collins's, and the final chapter is Dickens. And he puts forward this ethnocentric Dickens critique of the natives, whereas Wilkie Collins turns it around in the middle chapters and opens up the idea of natives who are understanding, who have sense, who have their internal rationality, who are human beings, not just these dangerous, savage, bloodthirsty figures that Dickens is talking about. And in the final chapter, Dickens turns things around. It's a play going on between them, turns things around to again reaffirm the idea of the natives being really dangerous. So in a collaborative work, Wilkie Collins couldn't actually put forward his ideas about the colonial people in the same way, but he writes Moonstone, which is really inspired by two of the stones, the Russian stone and the Kohinoor diamond. Now, in this narrative, in this story, there's a story of, it begins with a prologue where the author actually witnesses the plunder and loot of this diamond at the Battle of Seringapatam, when the treasury is being plundered and taken away. He sees his uncle appear with the stone taken away from the idol there. It was embedded in the head of the idol. It is taken away from there, and he sees his blood splattered hands, and he wants to stop him. He cannot, and he dissociates. He breaks off all his relationship with Horncastle, his uncle, and then Horncastle gives the stone to his niece Rachel, who was to get it on her 19th birthday, and on the date of the birthday, the stone disappears. It is taken away by somebody, and then the whole story is a mystery story, a detective story, one of the earliest detective stories, and some people say it is the first detective story, even before Edgar Allan Poe and other people started writing. He was writing this. So he is. There is a lot of intrigue, there is a lot of mystery, there are things happening, and people are giving their different versions of what happened in the story. Ultimately, the stone is discovered, and it is reinstated on the head of the idol from where it was taken. Now, I would argue that several things are happening here in this book in relation to us, which is important for understanding how it reconstitutes the mind of the people. In Dalhousie's story, the stone, the diamond, Kohinoor, as well as in the curse story, the Kohinoor did not belong to anyone. It moved from one, it is a history of mobility. It moved from one place to another. Originating in the mines of Golconda, it moved from one place to another, taken by one despot from another. The paths of its mobility were tied up with the history of conquest. Dalhousie had declared that the restless stone would at last find a proper resting place on the English crown. That was Dalhousie. I suggest by denying any history of proper ownership, Dalhousie legitimated the appropriation of diamond. It was as if an object no one legally owned could be taken without violating propriety. It belongs to no one. I'm just taking it. So it's being taken by conquerors, and we are the conquerors. We can take it. The conqueror had a right to possess the Kohinoor. It was a trophy of the victor, as Dalhousie repeatedly declared and flamboyantly declared. Its possession was a sign of victory and a sign of sovereignty. And those are the words of Dalhousie. In Moonstone, this story of mobility is erased. The right of the victor and the rationale of appropriation is denied. The diamond was tied to a place embedded on the head of an idol, the moon god. It acquired its name from the god, moon god, its name and its inner power from this divine association. From being linked to a history of Oriental savagery and barbarism, as in Dalhousie's story, it was linked by Collins to a deep sacred history. The luster of the moonstone, it was said, grew and lessened with the waxing and waning of the moon. And when Muhammad Ghazni came to loot and plunder, it was said, Collins said, Vishnu himself appeared to the three Brahmins in the dream and asked them to protect the stone, the diamond. The deity, he says, the deity breathed the breath, it is from Moonstone, breath of his divinity on the diamond in the forehead of the god, and the Brahmins knelt and hid their faces in their robes. The deity commanded that the Moonstone should be watched from this time forth by three priests in turn, night and day, to the end of the generation of men. And the Brahmins heard and bowed before his will. The deity predicted certain disaster to the presumptuous mortal who laid hands on the sacred gem, and to all of his house and name who received it after him. And the Brahmins caused the prophecy to be written over the gates of the shrine in letters of gold. So this is there, he's saying that it is a sacred. This curse has a sacred lineage, not just a superstition which is circulating. So here in this thing, there are many other things which are going on here in Collins's story, which I would not like to develop, but what I am, because it will take time, but what I wish to say is that in the story, what you see is Collins's effort to actually open your minds to the other, to the colonial other, their sacred history, what matters to them, just like he's doing in other texts and novels of his own. And this thing leads to this demand that this sacred stone be returned to the idol. That is, it was sacrilegious to take it away. There's a critique of the action of Dalhousie. There's a critique of the appropriation of them, and a demand that colonial governance should not be insensitive to the natives. There should be a respect for the local, even it is radically different, respect for local culture and local religion. There are many other things to talk about in the Moonstone, but I'll skip that. I'll end with my conclusion, but before that, one other interesting story, which is a story about a film which was being made about Moonstone. And I titled this section, When Skeptics Become Believers. A story, I would argue, becomes more believable and more persuasive when even skeptics begin to acknowledge the truth value of that story. That you begin as a skeptic, I don't believe in this. And then after a while you say, no, I cannot but believe in this. And when that story spreads, people then say that, yes, even the skeptics are saying this, therefore there must be some truth in this. And this story goes back to Queen Mary. When Mary of Teck became Queen of United Kingdom and the British Dominion, and as the wife of George V, she got interested in the crown jewels and on the diamond, Kohinoor. And she wanted histories to be written. And then these histories were being written, all the material was being collected, and she got so interested, she wanted to finance. She said that film should be made on the Kohinoor. And she asked a team to make a film on the Kohinoor, and this team set off with a project of 3 films they were to make in the east, one in Burma, and this Kohinoor was very much part of the project. And the newspapers were full of news about that, exciting news about this group going to film the history of Kohinoor, etc. So there was, in the newspapers, initially you see this optimism, this excitement, and gradually this gives way to dismay, disappointment, because the project is given up. And why is the project given up? The story is heard from the man who had taken over, who had taken the responsibility of the project, Captain Malins, who was going to make the film with his team and his assistant. When Captain Malins, one of those, the person in charge of making the film, returns from Singapore, a representative of the Daily Express meets up with him. Captain Malins said, and this is I quote, "It has been the closest call for all of us. From start to finish, we have been dogged by the most extraordinary ill luck, and many of those who went on the expedition have not returned. From the moment of departure, misfortune began to mark us down. Things of all kinds of things, inexplicable, unpleasant things began to happen. It really seemed as if the diamond had all of us down." Intrigued with this statement, the reporter asked, have you now started believing in the occult? Do you think that the ancient stone could really, within quotes, could really trouble 20th century excavators? And this jewel continues actually in its sinister ways now. Where the English are concerned, Malins then proceeds to chronicle the series of calamities that they had confronted. The day the expedition was set sail, he says, the young expert operator died at sea. On reaching Bombay, they found that all the promised support did not come. They had been promised a lot of support there in India, did not come. In traveling to Calcutta, they faced intense local hostility to the making of any film on Kohinoor. In Rangoon, where they were going to make a film in Burma too, in Rangoon, their beautiful Burmese actor fell ill, got grievously injured, and fever and mosquitoes killed many in the crew. Captain Reed, that is Malins's assistant, the new operator, both struggled with malaria, running up dangerously high temperature, at time over 106 degrees. The noxious pollens of the devil tree caused sores to all of them. At night, when they moved through the jungles with their elephants, it was very difficult to make their way. Captain Reed was bitten by poisonous snake. Malins was tricked by Chinese swindlers. The reporter asked, "Have you paid respect to the diamond since your return?" The reporter told him. And Captain Malins reached out for his cigarette. As he responded, with a twinkle in his eye, and smilingly he said, smiling, awkward smile, he said, "The Kohinoor seems to know quite a lot about me already. If all this happened before we actually got to the film, what is going to be the result when we did the film? So I give up." Therefore, he gives up the thing, returns, and gives this report. So in this narrative, we see that the narrator, Malins, actually begins as a skeptic also. He's an adventurer, does all sorts of films. And the interviewer, she is also, as you can see, is a skeptic. She's probing. She's open-minded, but is unwilling to believe. And she's pushing him to say, "Malins, do you believe now? You know, it's in the 19th century. How can we believe in 20th century? How can we believe in this?" And he says that, "Look, I don't want to take a personal risk. I don't want to know whether everyone believes in it. I don't want to take that risk." So there is a play here between belief and disbelief, and the transformation of a skeptic into a believer. And this is something which actually, when these kind of stories circulate, they consolidate belief. And therefore the curse is believed because it is constantly being written about, the news is circulating, reaffirmed through very many different stories. And I conclude with a few points, and that's, if it's not too long again. Dalhousie declared that Kohinoor would find its final resting place on the British crown. As it happened, the Kohinoor came to haunt the royalty and the public that venerated the crown. The diamond was recut and cleansed, inscribed with signs of the West, seemingly transformed into a modern object, bearing the marks of Western modernity, the fine signs of diamond cutting that happened after the exhibition. But the refashioned diamond, almost half the size of the original, was also imbued with a new past. What I argue in this paper is that the past embedded in the story of the curse was produced primarily in the West, circulated in the West, believed by the modern British public. And then it traveled back to the colony, to America, to Jamaica, to Africa, and I've tracked the story how it is spreading. It became part of accepted folklore, normalized and repeatedly reaffirmed in many different forms. It was owned by the colony, believed in, reproduced in many strategic ways, and used in many strategic ways. It was a past whose history can be traced back easily, whose history cannot be traced back easily to the centuries before Dalhousie appropriated the diamond from Dilip Singh. The curse in this sense was modern. It is not a superstition, old superstition from the East. It is intimately connected to the history of conquest and the violence of colonization. At the most obvious level, it expressed the fear of the Orient, its association with the Western imagination, with magic, the occult, and the demonic. But at a deeper level, and that's a point I would like to emphasize, it revealed the popular belief in the supernatural within British society. It reflected the way the occult world resides within the 19th century British imagination, finds its home in the modern. The Enlightenment struggled with the supernatural, but could not purge it. What is classified as pre-modern, ancient, traditional, is in many complex ways constitutive of the modern, integral to the modernist thought, not a survival from the past. There was also a story of guilt, which I've written about, that there is here a story of the guilt which is seen through the, and there is a story of fear. There is a story of play between fear and desire, and that's the last point I am with. The story of the curse also structured emotions, many layered anxieties, apprehensions, fears that had no visible everyday presence, but lurked somewhere in the background, within the interiority of selves, resurfacing precisely in moments of crisis. In 1857, everyone said Dalhousie has caused it. In 1875, when Dilip Singh rises in rebellion against the British crown, they say this Kohinoor has caused it. Please throw it into the sea. And somebody says, no, don't throw it into the sea, give it to the Russians, because we hate the Russians. Let them be destroyed through the Kohinoor. The curse of the Kohinoor seemed to threaten not just the royalty, and this is an important point, the dynasty that possessed it, but the nation and the empire itself. The fear that the violence that the British wrought in the colony will return to plague the British as retributive justice. The fear that the diamond would disrupt power from within, slowly, unobtrusively, silently, having got into the royal home and the nation itself. It will have its effects, bring death, pain, destruction without visible violence, destroy the royalty and the nation from within. The fear that the thing, the diamond, was alluring, an object of unbearable earning, impossible to possess, difficult to give away, and difficult to renounce. And that possession is a very disturbing possession. You can't give it away. Why couldn't it be given away? You can't, because you desire it. So there is a play of desire and distance here. The fear and desire were thus intimately connected, impossibly fused. When the object of fear is also the alluring object of desire, fear could not be overcome, and this possibility deepened the fear. There are other things to say, but I think I'll stop at that.
The stone definitely has power. power of silence, like we've sat through your lecture in total silence, listening to the power, and those terms like the curse captures public imagination. And these were the, I know that there will be a lot of questions when you hear something like this. And the movement, the mobility, not only of an object, but of an idea, of a belief into so many countries, traversing so many areas. So it's open to question. Who will be the first one? Yes.
Sir, my name is Ankit Sharma. I am from history. I have two questions. First, how have different cultures and empires interpreted the so-called curse of Kohinoor? Are there variations in how the curse is perceived in different societies? And sir, my second question is, how might the belief in a curse influence the behavior and decisions of those who came in the possession of the Kohinoor? Can the fear of a curse create a self-fulfilling prophecy? Thank you, sir.
We can take 2-3 questions together. So, the next.
Hello, sir. Sir, you have talked the power of stone. And our Indian also believe the power of stone, and they gave the idea of Navratna and also worship of Shivalinga in a form of stone. But our generation don't believe in that sense. Then why they believe the Western and then don't believe our ancestors? That's all. They believe the Western, the idea, the philosophy of stone, the written form, but they don't believe in Indian context. My question is why they don't believe our ancestors.
Anyone else? We can take one more from this. Yeah. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, sir. I'm Bhavani, first year history master student. My question is, a popular idea we see now is India demanding the return of Kohinoor. How do we look at this increased nationalist idea of the Kohinoor diamond, especially as an artifact of India, must come back to India within the myth of the curse surrounding it?
The question of how does a myth travel to different countries is a very important question and should be studied. At the moment, I have not studied how it spread to all other cultures. I've looked at how it spreads to Jamaica and the Caribbean islands. I've looked at Canada. I've looked at America. I've looked at the English-speaking world, and I've looked at how it returns and is retold in the school text from by late 1850s. It enters, for instance, the Bengali school textbooks. So it is being written there as there's a full chapter on it. So it is an important question which needs to be looked at, and the refigurations of the thing. Now, to the extent that I have seen, it takes on the two forms. One is the curse as a critique, and the curse as a superstition, a critique of the appropriation, the curse as a superstition from the East, and therefore a symbol of the magical East, all the Orientalist imagery symbolizing that. And the way it is reproduced in Indian texts, it is obviously not to symbolize the exotic, magical, occultist East. It is that there was a curse, and there's a fear there about the curse. And that's replayed, that you can see see in the, as I said, you can see in the YouTube versions that you can log in. There are about 4 or 5 or 6 YouTube versions today about the curse that is going on, and each of them mention the curse and demand that it comes back. There is restitution. That links up with Bhavani's question about restitution. Well, the point about mobility is that you don't, that you don't know who to give it back to. That's one. Even if somebody agrees to give back, who do you give it back to? It's been demanded by India, it's demanded by Pakistan, it's demanded by Afghanistan, it's demanded by Orissa, because it is said that there is a lot of evidence. We know that Ranjit Singh offered to give it over to the Jagannath temple before his death, but it was not given over subsequently. So Orissa demands it. So many people, because it's moving from place to who owns it. That's the problem of not having a legal ownership at that time. But the second point is that restitution now should become and is becoming a question of international debate and discussion, and laws about restitution. So if the country till that is formulated, we can't say according to this law where should it go. It will be decided. But some countries like France and others are giving back. They have started the process and are giving back. Britain is reluctant, doesn't wish to give back. But my point is not that it has to come back here. That's the general nationalist feel. My point is that Britain needs to recognize the violence of colonization through which it was acquired. That should be written into the history of Kohinoor and into the history of all objects and all artifacts and objects taken for India. If you go and see the exhibitions in Britain before last year, 2 years back, 2-3 years back, they started a decolonizing process where the colonization as a process is being recognized, and some of the rewriting which is going on is something I've gone and seen. But still it is not recognized. Every time you go and see these exhibitions, it is always a gift from India. The princes gifted this. They gave it to them. They bowed to the queen to give it to them. They were all running to the queen to take it over. So this is not a history which you can write in the 21st century. You have to write the history. There has to be a decolonization of all artifacts in the world. And if you once you write that history, it reconstitutes public memory. You know, again in 1942, the India office is plagued with demands of restitution, much before independence. One of the chaps is strongly arguing that this is a superstition in the East. If it's a small cost, give it back to them, people will be happy. It's not given up at that time, nor is it given up now. But the point is that the fact that it has been given by India to Britain as a gift, literally almost as a gift, by Dilip Singh to the Queen, makes it appear to the people in England that they have a right to own it. A gift is a right that it belongs to me now. Even if I don't see it as the trophy of the victor, an argument about a gift is given away. They don't still anguish that it is appropriated. It is a 11-year-old Dilip Singh who was supposed to be, the British were supposed to be the guardians of that. They dispossessed that person. And we have the history of how this negotiation for the Lahore Treaty, how it was imposed. So I don't use very rough language to say this was all theft, because theft is again a legal word. Before the language of theft legally is defined, you can't define what is theft in the 17th, 18th century easily. Theft is a legal word, but it is appropriation. So restitution debate will go on. Nationalist euphoria will happen. My demand, my thing is museums have to be decolonized and radically decolonized. Something which has happened in some way, rewriting which has happened in New Zealand, in Australia, in a lot of other places, but not in Britain. There was a question of Indian gem stories. Yeah, there is. I've been reading a lot of Indian Hirashastra and what. But the thing is, that is not circulating within the British public. It is important to understand the relationship between Indian Hirashastra and the British gemologist productions. How knowledge flows from here to there and there to here, and that's an important. Some of it I'm trying to do over time, but what structures the imagination of the public are the essays, stories, popular writings which talk about stones. And therefore that becomes important in the context of my history. But there will be something in my book on the way this connects to the Indian knowledge system about power of stones. I think I have answered.
Yeah. Take a set of again 3 questions.
My name is Shakti. I'm doing PhD in history. So I have seen your work, The Great Agrarian Conquest. It's a fascinating book. It's give to the new idea. And you said in the introduction also that there was old economic history going on and there was the discursive and cultural turn. So that book was a negotiation between them. I was also thinking something about this, what you lecture. I will more think about it, but I still want to know, is this work, you work a lot, you put efforts, decoding, deconstruct the things or this myth idea. How, after doing this work, you think what kind of historiography, Indian historiography, this work can revise the work that have been done so far? What kind of revision, how should we see Indian history now after you look, after you've done this work? What revision could be made from this work? Yeah.
Hi, hello. Yeah, I'm Akash. I'm from Department of Sociology, PhD scholar. I'm just interested to know how you link it with guilt, what you slightly mentioned at the end of the thing, especially in relation with the British public. Because I was just thinking when you were telling this story that it's aligned with the normative in British, in the sense that till 1857, they had this discourse of civilizing the native and this white man burden. And after World War II, you had this decolonization process. So this normative transition, it has a clear-cut relation with the guilt, because guilt has a clear-cut relation with how you legitimize a certain act in a public domain. So I just want to know how you link this whole story with the notion of guilt. Thank you.
Sir. Sir, I'm Rashmi, second MA history student. You said that it was initially believed that women would not be affected by Kohinoor's curse. So is it just because of the simple assumption that women hadn't worn it before, or is there anything more to it?
The argument about the historiographical significance of such a work, what is it that I feel will be the implication for the understanding of history? What kind of history is being written if I do something like this with a work of that? Now, 2-3 things I would say there. That first, this is also an attempt to doing an object history, which is to this is something which is being done now a lot. That is, how do we study objects? And one of the things that I try and make in this, and through the paper, through the chapters, is to suggest that an object like a Kohinoor or a diamond doesn't have an inner essence fixed to it. It is the meaning of that diamond, or the significance, meaning, and what it connotes changes over time with history. Therefore, if we study objects in history, through history, how it is being rethought, reimagined, refigured all the time, we get a complicated understanding of what objects are all about, and how this is historically, the meanings of the history is historically constituted. As you can see, that the curse story refigures the object as something to be feared, not just something to be desired. It is not the fantasy of the British. When Emily Eden comes to India and writes about the Kohinoor, she describes at length and how all the Brits are just completely out there waiting. You can see in the language of the description, there is desire and envy and desire, that the Lahore Darbar owns it and we don't own it. And it exudes from that page. And so after 10 years, 15 years, the whole story changes. The meaning is something where is different, where you fear that object. There is a dread about that object, but it's not a dread which is leads you on to give up that object, because there is also desire. So what I'm suggesting is that to historicize an object is to study objects as something something which is constantly reworked, reconstituted in history, and its meaning remapped onto the object all the time. Secondly, it is also to suggest that one of the things I'm trying to do here is also to look at how complex is the process of colonial governance. And you can't just write about colonialism as violence, loot, plunder, as something which they came, they looted, plundered, and went. This is a very common narrative with crude forms of nationalism. And it's become popular today. A lot of history is being written. And Kohinoor is one very good example of that. It's been taken. But this does not tell us anything about colonial governance. It does not tell us anything about colonialism. We know that colonialism subordinated the colony. We know things were taken. But to develop a more nuanced, complex understanding, what we need to do is see the internal negotiations, dialogues, languages of the discourse, where things are being debated and discussed, and the morality and ethics of colonialism is constantly being debated. And the study of the earlier paper that I presented in Cambridge, in which I talked of Kohinoor and the takeover of Kohinoor as a takeover which tells us about the making of the ethics and morality of colonialism, and how it is being its morality of colonialism or ethics is not only given, it is constituted through events. And each event that unfolds in the history of the Kohinoor helps to reconstitute that and define what the morality is. So that's about colonial power. It tell you about power and complex ways of looking at power. But it's also about cultural history, to bring in the question of popular mind not simply as the product of a teleological unfolding of rationality from above, of liberalism, democracy, utilitarianism, etc., but trying to see how popular culture develops and the kind of interaction you have between dominant discourses and popular discourses, which is constantly reconstituted through events. And therefore, bringing the popular in and studying that and looking at the interfaces becomes important. Guilt and fear. The guilt is, I try and develop that argument in the paper, which I don't elaborate here. See, there is a guilt there, Dalhousie has no guilt. Dalhousie is a flamboyant, aggressive imperial master. And he hates those who talk about sensitivity. He just literally abuses them. In his private letters, he's all the time abusing everyone. But there are others who feel guilty when things are done in ways which the British cannot uphold as British. When the colonial difference, and we know that what applies to Britain doesn't apply to the colony, but even that there is a space within which it can happen. When it appears that it is really un-British, there is a problem, and there is a certain guilt about it also. It's cannot be so assertively, aggressively done. And third, in this particular case, they are the guardians. So there is this inner ambivalence which you see in letters. And is it right for me as a royal, Victoria and others? Victoria writes about it to her daughter and others, that I have a discomfort all the time. There's a feeling that as the ruler, as the guardian, you cannot really dispossess this young chap and take over the property. I want it. She desired that. And that's very obvious in the thing. But there is still a guilt that this desire makes you feel guilty about the desire. And therefore, when the Dilip Singh comes to England, not therefore, that would be too crudely putting it, it's not coincidental that she patronizes Dilip Singh. She lavishes love and affection to Dilip Singh. She looks after Dilip Singh, although Dilip Singh rebels against her later. And when Dilip Singh comes to the court and a painting is being made about her, Login writes about it, and it's also there in the correspondence between in the Windsor House Royal Correspondence about the fact that Victoria wanted Dilip Singh, even after it had been given to Victoria, she returns it to Dilip Singh to say that could literally, and asks Login to ask whether he would agree to give it to him. And Dilip Singh gives it to him, bows down and gives it to her again. And this is when he's become an adult. Later he rebels. He writes scathing letters to Victoria, the British and others, and comes. So there is a guilt all the time at work. And this is not something which should be dismissed, because this is the complexity of colonialism that I'm talking about. Inner contradictions, inner conflicts are something we need to look at. And that makes for the complexity of history, It's not just a straightforward, you are a colonial master, therefore you can do everything. You can't so easily. There are differences of opinion. And there is a difference within you, that can I do it, or should I do it, or should I not do it? So those are the things which account for that guilt. And finally, about woman and feminine. Now, Wendy O'Flaherty has a book on this, on the ring, on the stone and the ring, and she talks about the importance of the feminine. But my feeling is, in this kind of a case, the despots are all men. Despotism, the way it is expressed, is a masculine quality. The ruthlessness, the intrigue, the kind of butchery, the blood, the gore, the killing, all that is described and is so much a description of the masculine quality of despotism in a certain sense. If it is a masculine, there is a masculinization of that imagery, then the curse, if associated with the despot, if a male despot, is likely to have mooring. And there is here a feminization, I think, of the story, where giving it to the female, she does not connote. Victoria is a different imagery. She's seemingly a just and understanding woman, and that feminizes the story in a different way. That would be my kind of argument tentatively.
Yeah, Anandita.
Thank you very much, Neeladri. That was very insightful and absolutely fascinating. I like like the way you brought in Dickens and Wilkie Collins and the story of the Moonstone, and the way you're tagging the conscience of the empire into Wilkie Collins's take of a sacred history of the stone. And I did feel that this kind of public imagination, popular imagination, would also be part of a larger literary, popular literary world. Conan Doyle is an example where you do have stones, where you do have loot in the colonies, India, for instance, or touching the conscience of virtuous British, civilians. So there is this larger ethical understanding of a just world, of a just colonial world, which I think you have disturbed very insightfully with a deep-seated understanding of violence and desire, which also doubles as fear. And I kind of feel that somehow this is part of a larger popular imagination, which is definitely coming out of the modern West. My question is, however, Wilkie Collins, with all his conscience, is also attributing a static Orientalism to the Brahmins, right? Okay, and this is also something which is part of a Oriental imagination coming out of the West, which is coming to India. Which is actually making the literary imagination of, especially of Bengal. I cannot really move very fast to other regions, but Bengal does have a kind of reflected take of this kind of popular imagination, which is coming out of the Western literary world. So in a way, colonialism, its fears, its ethical problems also become colony, right? Matters of the colony, right? We cannot really banish the empire so easily from the colonies too. So its fears, its desires also become ours, which is why the national question of whether the Kohinoor should be restituted, right? So perhaps these are questions that will bother me from now after hearing your talk. So thank you.
So we have only two more questions. Please.
So the Kohinoor is originally gone to probably the top regimes.
Can you please introduce yourself?
My name is Salim David. I am not from here. I studied in JNU, then I worked in Levers, and I've come back to Hyderabad. So my question is that since the Kohinoor went to the top regimes, and now it's with Britain, which is not the top regime anymore, so where do you think it's going to go now, Professor? Would you like me to repeat that? Okay. So the Kohinoor originally, Professor, went to the top regimes, So now that Britain is no longer the top regime, where do you think it's going to go now, since you studied it so deeply? Thank you.
Hello, sir. My name is Varsha. I am from history. Actually, you talked about the need for decolonization of British museums and all European museums as well. My question is, isn't there also a need for the larger democratization of Indian museums as well?
There was someone else.
Hi sir, I'm Rityunjay. I'm from the Department of Communication. When I heard the topic for the discussion, it reminded me of the curse of the mummy, like the phenomenon that occurred in Western media around the time of the discovery and excavation of the gravesite of Tutankhamun, the pharaoh in Egypt. I was wondering, since both are cases of the Western power coming into Eastern territory, documenting their history on their behalf, and kind of creating a mythos around it, if both curses could be seen as like cases of the same kind of Orientalism taking place.
We'll have one last question from the
Sir, first of all, thank you very much for the talk. It was very engaging. So my question is, you talked of the diamond as being perceived by the colonizing power as a gift, sir. So now, sir, here I think I sense a clear shift in the episteme, in the in the idea of its possession, as being possessed by someone, as being possessed by an Oriental power versus an Occidental power. So, sir, now, sir, this idea of a gift entails a certain obligation towards the presenter. Sir, so my question is, what were the ideological foundations behind this obligation, if any, if anything?
Can you repeat the question?
Okay.
Louder.
Okay, shall I be louder, sir? Okay, sorry. Sir, you talked about the diamond as being perceived by the colonizing power as a gift, right?
As a gift. He is talking about Ashoka as a gift.
Yeah, as a gift. So, sir, we sense here a change in the idea of its possession. There's a change as being first perceived by when it was perceived by an Oriental power, it was just thrifting between hands, and now it is perceived as a gift by this Occidental power, this colonizing power. So now I think this idea of a gift entails a certain obligation towards the presenter, right? It has a certain, someone who has received it is obligated to something. Okay, sir. So, sir, my question is, what were the ideologies behind this obligation, this idea of obligation, if any, if anything? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Anandita, that's an important question, very important question. One or two other points before I answer that. One or two other points which is important to make in terms of the Kohinoor and Moonstone story is that the Moonstone story sees the appropriation of the Moonstone as something reprehensible, as wrong. As something which should not have been done. It's sacrilegious. And it then goes on to argue through the thing, suggest that restitution is the only way to atone for the wrong. And therefore, the problem is resolved only when restitution happens. And that's a very strong feeling in one tradition of British thought. I'm not saying it's not homogeneous. So there are many. So therefore, atonement and restitution come together there in a certain way, which makes it important. And violence of this colonialism will be resolved through that act of restitution, and justice will be done. So that's something which is which structures the narrative. Now, it is a fact that Wilkie Collins is not simply Orientalist, he's also imperial. He has all the stereotypes of Orientalism, and he believes in colonial power. It is not, he believes in the empire, but he wants a certain form. The form of empire will be one where imperial masters will open their minds to the natives. And Orientalism is one way of opening the mind. The contrast between Orientalists and the Anglicans and the liberals is the liberals felt Britain is the West, knows it all. It's the most civilized country. It knows it, and everything else elsewhere was demeaned and inferiorized in that representation in the most aggressive way. Orientalism inferiorizes in a slightly different way by exoticizing it. But Orientalism still studies. All our knowledge that we get of ancient India, that it will be translations from Orientalist translations, from law to philosophy to things. They have translated it. They wanted to, whether it is William Jones and others. It's Orientalist. It is part of imperial project. It allows them a knowledge which becomes the basis of power and exercise, etc. But it is one where you think that there was something in the past which needs to be celebrated. You think that you need to open your minds to the knowledge of the other, to the ideas and logic and the mind and the feelings of the other. You may understand it in Orientalist way, but you're still opening it. And his attempt in this and in some other is that is you open your mind to the other. But he's understanding this whole thing about Brahmins and the stone being sacred, this person bowing down and giving, is reproducing all the, you're right, absolutely, Orientalist imagery, stock imageries of Orientalism. But my argument would be it is still within, and despite that, it is a critique. It is a critique of one form of imperial domination and violence to suggest that another kind of rule is a preferable, acceptable form of colonialism and empire. And that's a more civilized form, which is more consonant with the British Empire. And the fact that this book is so popular, it was written as a serial, and as it came out, there was feverish activity, and everyone was waiting to buy the next installment. And towards the end, he just had to dictate because he was very unwell, and he was dictating the final chapters, and it was amazing the number of copies that it sold. So, and this is constituting the mind of the public. About the stone, about diamonds, about not just this diamond. And the power of this moonstone, I feel, and I'm still tracking that story, is that it provides the template and trope through which all diamonds are perceived after this. By the early 20th century, and if you see the history of the top 10 diamonds, and this will be there in Google search, anyone's Google, most of them have the same curse story. And therefore this links up with the curse stories elsewhere. Curse story is very common now. It's linked up. The point would be to see when did that curse story start. And without a historical analysis, we can't believe in that curse story, because sometimes it starts much later, but people project it back. All the curse stories, it is said, were from the moment of origin associated with it. It is not. Because I've been tracking the origin of the other curse stories to see whether the Kohinoor story provides a template. And my feeling is that Moonstone provides a template. And the Kohinoor story is one of the earliest, along with the Hope Diamond story. But even Hope Diamond story, I think I have still to do more research on that. There is a book on that. But is something which I think came a little after this. But although he acknowledges other things. So I think you are absolutely right about the Orientalist. So he's Orientalist, he's colonial, he's imperial, he believes in the empire, but a more civilized form of... Yeah. The top regime. The question is not whether you're top or down, up and down. The question is, it was politics of a time when people were conquering each other, there were violent wars being fought to dominate the other. And what was in that war at that time, you know that at that time, it was legally allowed for the soldiers to go and take all the jewelry, all the treasure from anyone. That was part of the booty. It was written into the politics of the time. You can't say that is theft. I wouldn't say that is theft, because it was a part of the culture of the time. And there was nothing legally defining that is theft. And this was legally accepted till 1950s. And when initially I started doing research on the booty along with this, because all the jewelry was taken away, and then some of it was brought back and sold, and money was earned. That's also taking away. They came and sold it, earned the money in order to pay for the war and other things. Now, therefore. Seringapatam is one example, but everywhere it is being taken. And the army, and this Kohinoor story is linked up with the question of booty, because the army, Ellenborough to Gao to others, are saying that who the hell is Dalhousie to take over and give it to the queen? It belongs to the army. So there is a war going on between the army and the people who believe that all the jewels should go to the army, and Dalhousie and others who say no. I'm giving it over to the queen. So there is a lot of politics in. So now it is not the question of whether it is. They have it. And they possessed it before any law about it has been formulated. Now you can demand restitution, and it is the goodness of imperial states to begin to give back things. But for me, decolonization is more important than giving back. Giving back reluctantly and going on believing that actually it belongs to us doesn't decolonize the mind. What is important is to people think. And there was an attempt in the Kew Garden, and the heads of the Kew Garden began to decolonize the Kew Garden Museum, and the British Parliament opposed it. And they said, this is all woke politics, and you can't go and do it. And because Kew Garden is linked up with empire and colonization. Democratization of all museums, yes. But important thing is what you mean by democratization. One democratization is public access. Earlier museums were very specific access. And the second is allowing the public to relate to the objects in the best way possible, where the historicity of the object is recognized in a way which reconstitutes public mind in democratic forms. They have access to it, writing the history very carefully in layered ways, where different layers of information is given. It's being done all over the world in many different ways. Layers, you can get a synoptic argument, you can get more complex through videos and others, another layer of argument, a third layer, but it has to be properly done. In Indian museums, the write-ups are terrible. It's so horrible. Curation has not become a regular professional activity here. It's very, very regressive. And now, of course, it is linked up with the politics of the right, where museum rewriting means right-wing propaganda. So therefore, all those things become very, very important. And democratization at another level is happening in a lot of other museums, where, like in South Africa, a lot of museums are of the displacement, the stories of displacement that happened during the apartheid regime. They're asking those who are displaced, they're giving them platform and the walls and all to come and write their personal stories. So you are inscribed as a viewer and witness to the history, and viewer in the museum to write your story. That's a different layer of democratization, and they're arguing for that democratizing process as a process of museumization, which is an extremely radical form. It has its problem. It is ultimately you're given certain walls to write on. Now the entire museum is not being done. But there are ways in which you have to creatively think, and I agree with you that democratization is necessary. The curse stories, as I said, curse stories are not just with diamonds. Diamonds, it's all precious diamonds are linked up with curse stories, you can see what precious diamonds there is. To protect precious diamonds, these stories are also important. Anyone who appropriates it will be plagued with the curse in a certain sense. Therefore, it is a deterrence almost. But the point for historians, or even for sociologists and others, would be to see the discourse, the historical production of that curse. How does curse come to have an effect? How does it associate? I don't believe any curse is associated from time immemorial. it comes into being at a certain stage. And how does it come into being is the historian's question, the methodological question, that how do you track that thing? What I'm trying to do is to move through literary representations, public, newspapers, journals, magazines, private letters, Dalhousie's correspondence, diaries, and others, to see that story emerge, because very often what is publicly stated and what is privately believed is not publicly stated. And therefore you can see other layers of things coming out from the material that you see. And one is the question of obligation, I think.
Obligation.
That's
when you gift it,
it is there an obligation. All sociologists, are you a history student or a history? All sociologists will say, anthropologists, there is a complex politics of gift giving. It is given for a variety of reasons, and it defines a relationship between the giver and the receiver in many complex ways. It sometimes gift is given without an expectation of return. When the gift is given, like Bernie Cohn analyzes the gift being given to the ruler, the only expectation from the ruler, it is giving the gift is to submit to the ruler. And that's the way that the British appropriate the culture of gift here in India from the culture, the Mughal culture of giving of gifts. Now there it is an act of submission. I submit to you and I give a gift to you. All that I want and all you are obliged to do is protect, is ensure that our welfare is looked after. Whether it is not looked after is different, but in the rhetoric it is. The Queen of England looks after the welfare of the empire. That's the language, the discursive production of the civilizing mission, as well as the culture of power and rule, where she becomes the protector of all. Everyone who lives within the empire. Whether or not that happens, in what ways it happens, in what ways it does not happen, is for us to analyze in complex ways.
As they say, all good things have to come to an end. But this is not an end, because we are looking forward to a book. So when one lecture can generate so much of interest, so much of questions, and I'm sure that there were many more, which I had to stop. So naturally we can understand. So we look forward to your book, Neeladri. And now I have a very pleasant task of inviting my dear colleague, Professor Anandita Mukhopadhyay, who happened to be a student of Neeladri Bhattacharya, to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Suchandra. It is indeed a very pleasant task. First, I have to thank Professor Neeladri Bhattacharya for an amazing talk. I was absolutely spellbound, and I kept traveling back to many other classes in which I've sat equally spellbound. I now have to thank the IOE program for funding this series. This has been a very special School of Social Sciences series, which have been of amazing intellectual interest. It has produced a lot of intellectual crackle, as they say. For this, we have to thank our honored dean, Professor Jyotirmay Sharma, who has been the architect and the dynamism behind the project. And I also have to thank the students who have worked tirelessly to make this possible. I thank all my colleagues who have been present today. The audience has been absolutely amazing, both inside and outside the hall. We also have to thank the silent behind-the-scene workers, the staff. Thanks all around.